Imagine spending 25 years of your life building something from nothing, sacrificing weekends, missing family events, pouring every ounce of your soul into creating a legacy for your children. Now imagine your own son looking you in the eyes and telling you that at 58 you're too old, too outdated, too irrelevant to understand the very business you created with your bare hands. That's exactly what happened to me. And what my son didn't realize was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Hi everyone, I'm Linda, and today I'm sharing the most painful yet empowering story of my life. It's about betrayal, family, and discovering that sometimes the people closest to you underestimate your strength at their own peril. This story will show you that age isn't a limitation, it's an advantage, and experience isn't outdated. It's invaluable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My story begins on what I thought would be just another ordinary Tuesday morning in Denver, Colorado. I had arrived at the offices of Peterson Home Solutions an hour early, as I had done nearly every day for the past 25 years. The morning routine was sacred to me, reviewing the previous day's project reports, checking in with our foreman who started work at dawn, and preparing for the daily operations meeting that kept our $50 million home renovation company running smoothly. Peterson Home Solutions occupied a beautiful converted warehouse in the Arts District, with exposed brick walls displaying before and after photos of our most impressive projects. From luxury hotel renovations to historic home restorations, our work spoke for itself. Every photograph on those walls represented relationships I had built, trust I had earned, and standards I had maintained through decades of honest business practices. As I settled into my corner office with its view of the Rocky Mountains in the distance, I felt that familiar sense of pride and purpose. This company wasn't just my livelihood, it was my identity, my contribution to the world, my legacy for my children. I had no idea that within hours, everything I had worked for would be stripped away by the person I trusted most in the world. My name is Linda Peterson, and at 58 years old, I had built Peterson Home Solutions from a one-woman operation working out of my garage into Colorado's premier home renovation company. But my journey wasn't typical of most successful business owners. I didn't start with a business degree, venture capital, or even a clear plan. I started with desperation, determination, and an unwavering commitment to providing for my family after tragedy struck. 28 years ago, I was a 30-year-old single mother of two young children, Michael and Amy, ages 8 and 10. Their father, my first husband David, had died in a construction accident, leaving us with overwhelming medical bills, a mortgage we could barely afford, and no clear path forward. The life insurance payout was minimal, and I found myself working 2 jobs just to keep our heads above water, days at a local bank as a teller, and evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. It was during those evening cleaning jobs that I first discovered my talent for restoration work. One of the office buildings I cleaned was being renovated, and I became fascinated watching the contractors transform worn, dated spaces into modern, functional environments. I started asking questions, offering to help with small tasks, and gradually learning the trade through observation and hands-on experience. When one of the contractors mentioned that he was looking for someone to refinish some antique furniture for his personal home, I volunteered, despite having no formal training. I had always been good with my hands, and something about bringing old, forgotten pieces back to life appealed to me on a deep level. That first project led to another, then another, and soon I was spending my weekends in our garage, carefully, restoring furniture for neighbors and friends. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor, asked me to help renovate her kitchen. She had limited funds but desperately needed the work done, and the quotes she had received from established contractors were far beyond her budget. I agreed to take on the project for the cost of materials, plus a modest fee. working evenings and weekends while still maintaining my day jobs. That kitchen renovation changed everything. Mrs. Henderson was so pleased with the results that she recommended me to her friends at the church, who recommended me to their neighbors, who told their family members. Within 6 months, I had more refinishing and small renovation projects than I could handle in my spare time. The decision to leave my day jobs and focus entirely on the business was terrifying, but necessary. I named the company Peterson Home Solutions because I wanted people to know that we weren't just contractors, we were problem solvers. Every home had unique challenges, and every client had specific needs and budget constraints. My approach was to listen carefully, offer creative solutions, and treat every project as if it were being done for my own family. The early years were incredibly challenging. I worked 16-hour days, learning new skills through trial and error, building relationships with suppliers, and slowly establishing a reputation for quality work at fair prices. Michael and Amy, now teenagers, often helped with simple tasks like painting and cleanup, learning the value of hard work and attention to detail. As the business grew, I made strategic decisions that set us apart from larger, more impersonal contractors. We specialized in projects that required personal attention, historic home restorations, custom renovations for elderly clients who needed accessibility modifications, and boutique commercial projects for local businesses. Our crew was small, but skilled, and we took pride in developing long-term relationships with both clients and suppliers. The turning point came 12 years ago when we were selected to renovate the lobby of the historic Daniels Hotel downtown. The project was complex, requiring us to preserve original architectural details while meeting modern safety and accessibility standards. The successful completion of that project, which came in on time and under budget, established Peterson Home Solutions as the go-to contractor for high-end, detail-oriented renovations. Over the years, our client list grew to include some of Colorado's most prestigious organizations. The Davidson Hotel Group trusted us with renovating 15 properties across Colorado and Wyoming. Springfield Mall Development chose us for their upscale shopping center renovations. Heritage Homes, a luxury residential developer, made us their exclusive renovation contractor for their historic property acquisitions. These weren't just business relationships. They were partnerships built on mutual respect, consistent quality, and personal connection. I knew Margaret Davidson's coffee preferences and her concerns about maintaining her hotel's historic character. I understood Robert Springfield's vision for creating shopping environments that felt welcoming rather than sterile. Janet Walsh at Heritage Homes appreciated my attention to preserving original craftsmanship while incorporating modern amenities. 5 years ago, when Michael expressed interest in joining the family business full-time, I was overjoyed. He had just completed his MBA at the University of Colorado, and his business education would complement my practical experience perfectly. Michael had grown up around the business, working summer jobs on our project sites, learning the trades, and understanding our company culture from the ground up. I created the position of vice president specifically for Michael, giving him responsibility for business development, strategic planning, and client relationship management. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The plan was for him to gradually take over more responsibilities, eventually allowing me to step back and enjoy the fruits of decades of hard work. I envisioned myself in a consultant role, sharing my experience while giving Michael the freedom to guide the company into the future. Initially, everything seemed to be working perfectly. Michael brought fresh ideas about project management software, digital marketing strategies, and operational efficiency improvements. His business school training helped us formalize systems that I had managed intuitively for years. He was articulate in client presentations, comfortable with financial projections, and eager to expand our market reach. But gradually, I began to notice subtle changes in how the business operated. Michael started suggesting that I take a step back from direct client contact, arguing that it would be more efficient for him to manage those relationships while I focused on operational oversight. When I expressed concern about losing touch with our clients, he assured me that he was simply implementing best practices from his business education. Client meetings that I had always attended began happening without me. Michael explained that having too many voices in client discussions could be confusing, and that his generation communicated differently with modern business leaders. When longtime clients stopped calling me directly, Michael said it was because he had established himself as their primary point of contact, streamlining communication and preventing mixed messages. The changes happened so gradually that I didn't immediately recognize the pattern. A client dinner I wasn't invited to here, a strategy meeting I wasn't included in there, a project decision made without my input. Each individual incident seemed reasonable when Michael explained it, but together they represented a systematic isolation from the business I had built. My husband Tom, whom I had married when Michael and Amy were teenagers, began expressing concerns about the dynamic between Michael and me. Tom had watched our family business grow from the outside, offering support and perspective without being directly involved in day-to-day operations. His objectivity allowed him to see patterns that I was too close to recognize. During our evening conversations, Tom would gently point out instances where Michael seemed to be undermining my authority or excluding me from important decisions. I dismissed his concerns, explaining that this was simply the natural transition of leadership from one generation to the next. Michael was 33 years old, educated, ambitious, and ready to take on greater responsibility. My role was to support his growth, not micromanage his decisions. But Tom's warnings proved prophetic. 3 months before that devastating Tuesday morning, Michael had approached me about taking a more advisory role in the company. He suggested that I focus on mentoring junior staff and maintaining relationships with long-term suppliers, while he handled strategic planning and client management. The proposal was presented as a natural evolution that would leverage my experience, while utilizing his modern business training. I agreed to the arrangement, partly because I trusted Michael's judgment, and partly because I was genuinely ready to reduce my workload after 25 years of intense involvement in every aspect of the business. What I didn't realize was that Michael wasn't preparing me for a gradual transition. He was systematically removing me from positions of influence and decision-making authority. The warning signs were there, but I chose to interpret them charitably. When Michael moved his office to the executive suite and relocated me to a smaller space, he explained it was about optimizing workflow and giving him better access to the conference room for client meetings. When he hired his wife Sarah as director of marketing without consulting me, he said it was an efficiency decision that would strengthen our digital presence and modernize our brand image. Looking back, I can see that Michael had been planning my removal for months, carefully positioning himself as the face of the company while gradually marginalizing my role. He had been meeting individually with board members, sharing his vision for the company's future, and subtly undermining confidence in my continued leadership. He had been telling our major clients that I was considering retirement, encouraging them to develop relationships with him as their future primary contact. The most painful realization was that Michael had been using my own words and actions against me. Every time I expressed fatigue after a long day, he framed it as evidence that I was losing stamina for the demands of running a modern business. Every time I asked him to explain a new technology or process, he characterized it as proof that I was falling behind current industry standards. Every time I deferred to his expertise in areas where he had more recent training, he presented it as confirmation that I was becoming dependent on others for basic business decisions. On that Tuesday morning, as I reviewed project reports and prepared for what I thought would be a routine operations meeting, I had no idea that Michael had called a special board meeting to discuss my retirement. I didn't know that he had prepared a presentation about my declining engagement with the business and my inability to adapt to modern business practices. I wasn't aware that he had already drafted severance agreements and transition plans for my departure. The call came at 9:30. Sarah, Michael's wife and our marketing director, asked me to join them in the main conference room for an important discussion about the company's future direction. I assumed we were going to review quarterly results or discuss upcoming projects. I gathered my files, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and walked confidently into what I expected to be a collaborative planning session. Instead, I found myself facing 12 board members seated around our polished mahogany conference table, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to apologetic. Michael sat at the head of the table in the chair I had occupied for every major company meeting over the past 2 decades. The formal arrangement immediately told me this wasn't the casual discussion I had anticipated. The fluorescent lights seemed harsh and clinical as Michael began speaking, his voice carrying a cold professionalism I had never heard before. There was no warmth, no acknowledgement of our relationship, no recognition of my role in creating the very company where this meeting was taking place. He spoke about me as if I were a problematic employee rather than his mother and the founder of Peterson Home Solutions. As Michael delivered his prepared remarks about my need to step down, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching someone else's life fall apart. 25 years of building relationships, establishing systems, creating jobs and serving clients were being dismissed as outdated and irrelevant. My age, which I had always considered an asset representing experience and wisdom, was being presented as a liability that threatened the company's future success. The board members, most of whom I had personally recruited and mentored, couldn't meet my eyes. These were people I had trusted with significant decisions, individuals whose expertise I had valued and whose judgment I had respected. Now they were sitting silently while my son systematically dismantled my professional credibility and personal dignity. When Michael finished his presentation and asked if I had any questions, I found myself speechless. The betrayal was so complete, so unexpected, so carefully planned that I couldn't immediately process what was happening. This wasn't a business decision. It was a personal attack disguised as corporate restructuring. This wasn't about the company's needs. It was about Michael's ambition and his willingness to sacrifice his own mother to achieve his goals. As I sat in that conference room, surrounded by people I had considered colleagues and friends, I realized that Michael had fundamentally misunderstood something crucial about business, about relationships, and about me. He saw my age as weakness, but he had never learned that experience builds strength. He viewed my collaborative approach as indecision, but he had never understood that listening to others creates loyalty. He interpreted my willingness to mentor him as dependence, but he had never recognized that teaching requires confidence and competence. My son thought he was removing an obstacle to his success, but what he had actually done was declare war on someone who had spent 25 years learning how to fight, how to survive, and how to win. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he had no idea what was coming next. The silence in that conference room stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Michael's words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had just consumed everything I held dear. You're 58 years old. You don't understand social media, digital marketing, or how modern business works. This company needs fresh leadership. I looked around the table at faces I had known for years. Board members who had joined Peterson Home Solutions when we were still a small operation, who had watched me navigate economic downturns, industry changes, and countless challenges. Now they sat like strangers, avoiding eye contact, their discomfort palpable, but their silence deafening. "Don't worry, Mom," Michael continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "We'll give you a nice severance package. You can finally relax, maybe take up gardening." Gardening. As if 25 years of building a business empire could be replaced by tending to tomatoes and roses. As if my expertise, my relationships, my legacy could be dismissed with a hobby suggestion. The condescension in his voice was so thick I could taste it, bitter and poisonous. I stood up slowly, my legs surprisingly steady despite the earthquake that had just shattered my world. "I see," I said quietly. My voice didn't betray the storm brewing inside me. Years of negotiating with difficult clients, managing crisis situations, and maintaining composure under pressure had taught me to never let them see you break. "I'll need some time to process this," I continued, gathering my papers with deliberate, when do you need my answer?" Michael looked surprised by my composure. Perhaps he had expected tears, arguments, or desperate pleading. "Well, we'd like to make this transition as smooth as possible. How about we reconvene tomorrow morning to discuss the details?" I nodded curtly and walked out of that conference room with my head held high, even though every step felt like walking through quicksand. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the familiar artwork on the walls now looking like exhibits in a museum dedicated to my former life. Employees who had worked for me for years looked up as I passed, some offering uncertain smiles, others quickly averting their gazes. Word travels fast in a company of our size, and the atmosphere told me that rumors were already circulating. My office felt different when I returned to it. The same furniture, the same view of the mountains, the same family photos on my desk. But everything had changed. This space that had been my sanctuary, my command center, my second home for over 2 decades suddenly felt foreign and temporary. I was no longer the CEO sitting in her office. I was a fired employee cleaning out her desk. But as I sat there, staring at the framed photo of Michael's graduation from business school where he had thanked me in his speech for being his inspiration and role model, something began to shift inside me. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something much more dangerous: clarity. Michael thought he had caught me off guard, that his carefully orchestrated ambush had left me defenseless and defeated. What he didn't know was that I had been in business long enough to develop instincts about when things weren't quite right. Over the past few months, those instincts had been whispering warnings that I had chosen to ignore out of love and trust for my son. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I had been maintaining almost unconsciously. Inside were copies of emails, project reports, client communications, and meeting notes that had seemed slightly off at the time, but not significant enough to address directly. Now, viewed through the lens of Michael's betrayal, these documents told a very different story. There was the email thread about the Davidson Hotel Group contract renewal, where Michael had marked me as CC instead of the primary recipient, despite my being their main point of contact for over 12 years. There were the project status, reports that had stopped coming to me directly 3 months ago, requiring me to request updates rather than receiving them automatically. There were the meeting invitations for strategic planning sessions that had somehow failed to reach my calendar. Most telling were the client interaction logs that showed a pattern of Michael scheduling appointments and site visits without informing me, then following up with emails that positioned him as the primary decision-maker while relegating me to a consulting role. He had been systematically inserting himself between me and the relationships I had spent decades building. My phone buzzed with a text message from Betty Morrison, my head of operations and the closest thing I had to a best friend in the business world. Betty had started with Peterson Home Solutions 15 years ago as a project coordinator and had grown into an indispensable part of our leadership team. If anyone would know what was really happening behind the scenes, it would be Betty. "Can we talk?" "Not here. Rosie's Diner on Colfax in an hour?" I replied immediately. "I'll be there." Rosie's Diner was our unofficial meeting place for conversations that required privacy and comfort food. Betty and I had solved countless business problems over coffee and pie in that red vinyl booth by the window. The diner was far enough from our office to avoid unwanted ears, but close enough to feel like home territory. Betty was already waiting when I arrived, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by an expression of concern and barely contained anger. She stood up to hug me as I approached the table, and I felt some of the tension in my shoulders begin to release. At least I wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. "I heard what happened," she said as we settled into our usual booth. This is wrong, Linda. So wrong that I've been sitting here for the past hour trying to figure out how to tell you what I know without making everything worse. The way she said it made my stomach clench. What do you mean? Betty pulled out a manila folder that looked suspiciously similar to the one I had been compiling. I've been keeping track of things that didn't seem right. At first, I thought I was being paranoid or overprotective of you. But after what happened today, I think you need to see this. She opened the folder and spread several documents across the table between us. The first was a printout of an email exchange between Michael and the board members that had taken place 2 weeks ago. The subject line read, "Leadership Transition Planning, Confidential." As I read through Michael's carefully crafted message, my coffee grew cold in my hands. He had laid out a detailed case for why I needed to be removed from active leadership, citing my resistance to modernization, my over-reliance on outdated business practices, and my inability to adapt to changing market conditions. Each point was supported by specific examples that had been taken out of context or deliberately misinterpreted. The email described my collaborative leadership style as indecisiveness that slows down critical business processes. My preference for face-to-face client meetings was characterized as inefficient relationship management that doesn't scale with modern business demands. My careful approach to major decisions was framed as analysis paralysis that prevents the company from capitalizing on market opportunities. What made the betrayal even more painful was seeing how Michael had twisted moments of trust and vulnerability into evidence of incompetence. When I had asked him to take the lead on implementing new project management software because his generation was more comfortable with technology, he had presented it as proof that I was unable to keep up with basic business tools. When I had delegated certain client presentations to him to give him more visibility and experience, he had characterized it as evidence that I was stepping back from core responsibilities. "There's more," Betty said quietly, sliding another document across the table. This one was a timeline of client interactions over the past 6 months, showing how Michael had been systematically repositioning himself as the primary contact for our major accounts. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Michael would schedule follow-up calls or meetings with clients, ostensibly to support my efforts, but would then use those interactions to plant seeds of doubt about my continued involvement with the company. He would make casual comments about my well-deserved retirement plans, or suggest that I was looking forward to spending more time with family. When clients expressed surprise or concern, he would reassure them that he would personally ensure continuity of service and maintain the relationships they valued. "He's been telling people you're planning to retire?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not exactly," Betty replied. "He's been more subtle than that. He talks about your transition to an advisory role and how excited you are about the next chapter of your life. He makes it sound like this is all your idea, that you're choosing to step back rather than being pushed out." The manipulation was masterful in its sophistication. Michael hadn't spread obvious lies that could be easily disproven. Instead, he had created a narrative that seemed plausible and even positive, painting my removal as a natural evolution rather than a hostile takeover. Anyone hearing his version of events would think this was a planned succession that had my full support and enthusiasm. Betty continued laying out documents that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Michael's campaign against me. There were records of one-on-one meetings he had scheduled with each board member over the past 2 months, ostensibly to discuss strategic planning, but actually to build support for his vision of the company's future. There were copies of proposals he had submitted for restructuring the organization chart, with my position either eliminated entirely or reduced to a ceremonial consulting role with no real authority. Most damaging were the financial projections he had prepared, showing how much more profitable the company could become under his leadership. The numbers looked impressive on the surface, but I could see the flaws in his assumptions. He had projected cost savings from eliminating what he called redundant management layers, and outdated operational procedures, but he had failed to account for the institutional knowledge and client relationships that would be lost in the process. "Betty, how long has this been going on?" I asked, still trying to process the scope of Michael's deception. "I think he started planning this seriously about 6 months ago," she replied. "But looking back, I can see signs that go back even further. Remember when he suggested reorganizing the office layout to improve workflow efficiency? That was when he moved himself into the executive suite and relocated you to the smaller office. At the time, it seemed reasonable, but now I think it was part of establishing himself as the visible leader while reducing your physical presence in the power center of the company." The memory stung because I had actually praised Michael for thinking strategically about office dynamics and workflow optimization. I had seen his suggestions as evidence of his business school training being put to good use, never suspecting that he was orchestrating my gradual marginalization. "What about Sarah?" I asked, referring to Michael's wife and our marketing director. "Is she involved in this?" Betty's expression grew even more troubled. "Sarah is harder to read. She's been uncomfortable with some of Michael's decisions, and I've noticed her trying to include you in conversations and meetings that Michael would prefer to handle without you. But she's also his wife, and she's been put in an impossible position. I think she knows what's happening isn't right, but she's not sure how to address it without creating problems in her marriage." The complexity of the family dynamics made everything more painful. Sarah wasn't just an employee, she was my daughter-in-law, someone I had welcomed into our family and supported in her career. The idea that she might be complicit in Michael's plan was heartbreaking, but the possibility that she was trapped between loyalty to her husband and doing what was right was almost worse. "There's one more thing," Betty said, hesitating before pulling out the final document. "Michael has been in contact with other companies about potential partnerships or acquisitions. I think he's planning to sell Peterson Home Solutions." The document was a preliminary inquiry from Titan Construction, a national chain that specialized in large-scale commercial renovations. They had reached out to Michael about the possibility of acquiring regional companies to expand their presence in the Colorado market. Michael's response had been encouraging, suggesting that Peterson Home Solutions might be interested in exploring a partnership or acquisition under the right circumstances. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Michael succeeded in removing me and consolidating control of the company, he would be free to sell the business I had built from nothing. The employees who had worked with me for years, the clients who trusted our personal approach to their projects, the local suppliers who had grown alongside our success, all of that would be sacrificed for a quick profit and integration into a corporate machine that valued efficiency over relationships. "Betty, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "Do you think I've lost my edge? Have I become the outdated, resistant-to-change leader that Michael is describing?" Betty's response was immediate and forceful. "Linda, you're asking the wrong question. The right question is whether Michael has the experience, the relationships, and the judgment to run this company without destroying everything you've built. And the answer to that question is absolutely not." She leaned forward, her voice intense, with conviction. "You want to know what I see when I look at how this company operates? I see a leader who knows every client's preferences, every employee's strengths, and every project's unique challenges. I see someone who can walk onto any job site and immediately spot potential problems that would cost us thousands of dollars, if not addressed. I see a business owner who has maintained relationships with suppliers for decades, earning us priority treatment and better pricing because they trust your word." Betty pulled out her phone and showed me the company's client satisfaction scores and employee retention rates. "These numbers don't lie. Under your leadership, we have the highest client satisfaction rates in the industry and the lowest employee turnover of any company our size. Those aren't the metrics of an outdated leader. Those are the results of someone who understands that business success comes from taking care of people, not just managing spreadsheets." Her words were exactly what I needed to hear, but they also crystallized something important. This wasn't just about my pride or my feelings. Michael's actions weren't just hurting me. They were threatening the livelihoods of every employee who depended on Peterson Home Solutions, the satisfaction of every client who trusted us with their projects, and the stability of every relationship that had taken decades to build. "What are you going to do?" Betty asked. I looked out the window of Rosie's diner at the Denver skyline, seeing the buildings where we had completed projects, the neighborhoods where we had restored homes, the community where we had built our reputation, one satisfied customer at a time. Michael thought he could erase 25 years of relationship building with a PowerPoint presentation and a severance package. He was about to learn how wrong he was. "I'm going to fight," I said simply, "but I'm going to need help." Betty smiled for the first time since I had arrived. "You've got it. What do you need me to do?" Marker, Part 3. Gathering Intelligence. Over the next 3 days, Betty and I worked like intelligence operatives, carefully gathering information while maintaining the appearance of business as usual. The challenge was obtaining evidence of Michael's deception without alerting him to our investigation or putting Betty's job at risk. We developed a system of communication using personal cell phones and meeting at locations away from the office, treating every conversation as if it might be monitored. Betty's access to company systems and her relationships with other employees proved invaluable. As head of operations, she had legitimate reasons to review project files, client communications, and financial reports. Her long-standing friendships with staff members across all departments meant that people felt comfortable sharing their observations and concerns with her in casual conversations. What we discovered was both more extensive and more disturbing than I had initially suspected. Michael's campaign to undermine my credibility hadn't been limited to board members and major clients. He had been systematically planting doubts about my competence throughout the entire organization, using different approaches for different audiences, but always with the same underlying message. Linda Peterson was no longer the leader Peterson Home Solutions needed. With project managers and foremen, Michael had emphasized my supposed disconnect from day-to-day operations. He would make comments about how I was out of touch with the realities of modern construction and focused on old-school methods that don't work in today's market. When experienced crew members would reference established procedures that I had developed over years of trial and error, Michael would suggest that these approaches were legacy processes that needed updating for efficiency. The cruel irony was that many of these legacy processes were safety protocols, quality control measures, and client relations practices that had been developed specifically to address problems we had encountered in the past. Michael's dismissal of these procedures as outdated showed his fundamental misunderstanding of why they existed and what value they provided. With administrative staff and newer employees, Michael had taken a different approach, portraying me as a well-meaning but increasingly confused leader who was struggling to keep up with modern business demands. He would make sympathetic comments about how difficult it must be for someone of Mom's generation to adapt to all these technological changes, and how we need to be patient with her as she adjusts to a reduced role. This narrative was particularly insidious because it positioned Michael as a caring son looking out for his aging mother, rather than an ambitious executive orchestrating a corporate coup. Anyone who questioned his actions could be made to feel like they were being unfair to a devoted family member who was trying to manage a delicate transition with sensitivity and respect. The most sophisticated part of Michael's strategy involved the manipulation of information flow throughout the company. Betty discovered that he had been subtly altering communication patterns to ensure that critical information reached him first, allowing him to control how it was distributed and interpreted. Project updates, client feedback, financial reports, and operational issues were all being filtered through Michael before reaching other senior staff or board members. This information control served multiple purposes. It allowed Michael to present himself as the most informed and engaged leader in the company, while making me appear disconnected from important developments. It gave him the opportunity to spin negative news in ways that supported his narrative about the company needing new leadership. Most importantly, it prevented me from having access to the real-time information I needed to challenge his version of events or demonstrate my continued value to the organization. On Thursday afternoon, Betty brought me information that changed everything. Jim Rodriguez, our longtime electrical contractor and one of my most trusted business partners, had reached out to her with concerns about conversations he had been having with Michael. Jim's company had been working with Peterson Home Solutions for 8 years, handling electrical installations and upgrades for virtually all of our residential and commercial projects. "Jim wants to meet with you," Betty told me during our daily coffee rendezvous at Rosie's Diner. "He says Michael has been telling people things about you that aren't true, and he has recordings." The prospect of recordings sent a chill down my spine. In Colorado, it's legal to record conversations as long as one party consents, which meant that Jim could have been documenting his interactions with Michael without violating any laws. But the existence of recordings also suggested that whatever Michael had been saying was serious enough to warrant that level of documentation. We arranged to meet Jim that evening at his office in a converted warehouse near the rail yards. Jim Rodriguez had built his electrical contracting business from a one-man operation into a crew of 12 skilled electricians, following a path similar to my own journey with Peterson Home Solutions. We had developed a relationship based on mutual respect, shared values, and a commitment to quality work that went beyond simple vendor-client transactions. Jim's office reflected his personality, functional but comfortable, with photographs of completed projects covering one wall and electrical supply catalogs stacked neatly on shelves. He greeted me with the same warmth he had always shown, but I could see anger and concern in his eyes. "Linda, I've been doing business with you for 8 years," he began without preamble. "In all that time, you've been straight with me, paid our invoices on time, and treated my crew with respect. That's why what I'm about to tell you is so hard to hear." He pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the desk between us. 2 weeks ago, Michael asked me to meet him for drinks after work. Said he wanted to discuss some upcoming projects and get my thoughts on the electrical aspects of the work. I thought it was smart business development, so I agreed. Jim pressed play on the recorder, and Michael's voice filled the small office. The conversation started normally enough, with discussion of project timelines and crew scheduling. But gradually, Michael steered the discussion toward my role in the company and my capacity to continue leading Peterson Home Solutions effectively. "Between you and me, Jim," Michael's recorded voice said, "I'm worried about Mom. She's been making some decisions lately that don't make sense, forgetting details, getting confused about project specifications, repeating herself in meetings. I think the stress of running the company is getting to her." The casual way he delivered these lies, the concerned tone in his voice, the implication that he was confiding in Jim out of worry for my well-being, it was masterfully manipulative. Anyone hearing this conversation would come away believing that Michael was a devoted son dealing with the difficult reality of his mother's declining mental capacity. But Jim's response on the recording showed that he wasn't buying Michael's performance. "I haven't noticed any confusion when I talk with Linda. She's always been sharp about electrical requirements and project details. Are you sure you're not misreading normal signs of being busy and stressed?" Michael's reply revealed the calculated nature of his campaign. "That's the thing about early-stage cognitive decline. It can be subtle. People can seem fine in familiar situations but struggle when they're faced with new challenges or complex decisions. Mom's been avoiding client meetings lately, delegating decisions she used to make herself. I think she knows something's wrong, but doesn't want to admit it." The recording continued for another 10 minutes, with Michael building an increasingly detailed picture of my supposed mental decline. He described fictional incidents of confusion, fabricated examples of poor judgment, and invented scenarios where I had needed his intervention to prevent mistakes. Each lie was delivered with the perfect combination of sadness and concern, as if he were reluctantly sharing painful family information with a trusted friend. "Jim, why did you record this?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Because none of it was true," he replied firmly. Every example Michael gave, every incident he described, I knew they were lies because I've worked closely with you on all the projects he mentioned. You've never been confused, never needed his intervention, never shown any signs of the problems he was describing. Jim leaned forward, his expression intense. "But here's the thing that really bothered. Michael wasn't just lying about your mental state. He was testing my reaction, seeing if I would believe his story and spread it to other contractors. When I pushed back on his claims, he immediately changed the subject and ended the meeting. That's when I realized this wasn't a son worried about his mother. This was someone building a case for removing you from your own company." The implications were staggering. If Michael was having similar conversations with other contractors, suppliers, and business partners, he was systematically destroying my professional reputation throughout the entire industry. Even if I successfully fought his attempt to remove me from Peterson Home Solutions, the damage to my credibility could make it impossible to continue working effectively in the Denver construction and renovation market. "Have you heard Michael having similar conversations with other people?" Betty asked. Jim nodded grimly. "I've talked to Carlos Mendez at Mile High Plumbing and Susan Chen at Rocky Mountain Supplies. Michael has approached both of them with versions of the same story. Carlos didn't buy it, but Susan seemed more receptive. She mentioned being concerned about your health issues when I spoke with her yesterday." The scope of Michael's deception was becoming clearer. This wasn't just a corporate power grab. It was a comprehensive character assassination designed to make it impossible for me to challenge his version of events or maintain credibility within the business community. By the time his lies had circulated through the network of contractors, suppliers, and clients that formed the backbone of our industry, the truth would be irrelevant. The damage would be done. "There's something else," Jim continued, pulling out a folder. "Michael mentioned that Peterson Home Solutions might be partnering with a national company for bigger projects. He said it was confidential, but he wanted to know if I'd be interested in working with a larger organization that could offer more steady work and better benefits for my crew." The folder contained preliminary information about Titan Construction's expansion plans in the Colorado market. Jim had done his own research after Michael's comments, and what he had discovered confirmed our worst fears. Titan's business model involved acquiring successful regional contractors, eliminating redundant staff and overhead, and integrating operations into their standardized corporate structure. "If Peterson Home Solutions gets sold to Titan," Jim explained, "they'll replace all the local subcontractors with their own national network. My company, Carlos's plumbing business, Susan's supply relationships, all of that goes away. They bring in their own people from Texas and Oklahoma, pay them less than local rates, and pocket the difference." The full picture of Michael's betrayal was finally becoming clear. He wasn't just removing me from the company I had built. He was preparing to sell that company to a corporate buyer that would destroy the entire network of relationships and partnerships that made Peterson Home Solutions successful. The employees who had worked with me for years, the contractors who had built their businesses alongside ours, the suppliers who had grown with us, all of them would be casualties of Michael's ambition. "What can we do to stop this?" Betty asked. I looked at the evidence we had gathered. Emails showing Michael's deception, recordings proving his lies, documents revealing his plans to sell the company. We had proof of his systematic campaign to undermine my credibility and position himself as my replacement. But proof wasn't enough. We needed a strategy that would not only expose Michael's deception, but also protect the company and the people who depended on it. "We need more than evidence," I said slowly. "We need allies, people who can help us present the truth in a way that can't be dismissed or explained away." Over the next hour, we developed a plan that would require careful timing, absolute discretion, and the support of key people both inside and outside Peterson Home Solutions. The plan was risky. If Michael discovered what we were doing before we were ready to act, he could accelerate his timeline and complete his takeover before we could stop him. But as I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since walking out of that devastating board meeting: hope. Michael had made a critical error in his campaign against me. He had underestimated the loyalty of the people who had worked with me for years, the strength of the relationships I had built throughout the industry, and my own determination to fight for what I had created. My son thought he had isolated me, discredited me, and positioned me for easy removal. What he hadn't realized was that he had also provided me with the motivation and the evidence I needed to expose his deception and save the company he was trying to destroy. The real battle was just beginning. Part 4. The Unexpected Ally. Friday morning brought an unexpected complication that would change everything. I was in my home office, reviewing the evidence Betty and I had compiled, when my phone rang with a call from Amy, my daughter. Amy lived in Phoenix, where she worked as a senior marketing executive for a technology company. And while we stayed in touch regularly, a Friday morning call was unusual. "Mom, I heard about what happened with Michael in the company," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of concern and confusion. "I'm flying to Denver this weekend. We need to talk." Amy had always been the mediator in our family, the one who tried to find middle ground when Michael and I disagreed about business decisions or family matters. She was brilliant, successful in her own right, and had inherited my analytical nature combined with a diplomatic approach to problem solving. If anyone could help me navigate this family crisis, it would be Amy. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake a nagging worry about Amy's involvement. Michael and Amy had always been close siblings, and despite living in different states, they maintained regular contact. There was a real possibility that Michael had reached out to Amy first, presenting his version of events and positioning himself as the reluctant son dealing with his aging mother's decline. If Amy arrived in Denver already believing Michael's lies, she could become another obstacle rather than an ally. Saturday afternoon, I picked Amy up at Denver International Airport. She looked every inch the successful executive in her tailored blazer and designer jeans, her confident demeanor reflecting the leadership skills she had developed in the competitive technology industry. But I could see concern in her eyes, and the careful way she hugged me suggested she was evaluating my mental state even as she greeted me. During the drive to my house, Amy asked gentle but probing questions about how I was feeling, whether I had been sleeping well, if I thought taking a step back from the company might be beneficial for my health and well-being. The questions were asked with love and concern, but they were exactly the kinds of inquiries someone would make if they believed their mother was suffering from cognitive decline or stress-related mental health issues. "Amy," I said as we pulled into my driveway, "what exactly did Michael tell you about what happened?" She hesitated before answering, which told me everything I needed to know. "He said that the board felt it was time for a leadership transition, that you've been struggling with some of the demands of running a modern business, and that he's worried about the stress you've been under." The careful phrasing revealed that Michael had been just as manipulative with Amy as he had been with everyone else. He hadn't told her outright lies, but he had presented selective information designed to create a specific impression. Amy's questions during the car ride weren't random. They were based on concerns that Michael had planted in her mind. That evening, as we sat in my living room with Tom joining us for moral support, I decided to take a calculated risk. Instead of immediately defending myself against Michael's implications or launching into an explanation of his deception, I asked Amy to help me understand what had happened from an objective perspective. "I know you work in marketing and understand business strategy," I began. "Would you be willing to look at some documents and give me your professional opinion about what you see?" I started with the most neutral evidence: The timeline of organizational changes over the past 6 months, the shifting patterns of client communication, and the alterations to information flow within the company. I presented these changes without editorial comment, letting Amy draw her own conclusions about what the patterns revealed. Amy's marketing expertise made her particularly skilled at recognizing narrative construction and message manipulation. As she reviewed the documents, I could see her analytical mind working, identifying inconsistencies and questionable explanations that someone without her professional background might miss. "Mom, this doesn't look like a natural leadership transition," she said after an hour of careful review. "This looks like someone systematically repositioning themselves to take control while marginalizing the existing leadership." That observation opened the door for me to share the rest of our evidence. Betty's documentation of Michael's lies to board members, Jim's recordings of the false claims about my mental state, and the information about Michael's secret negotiations with Titan Construction. With each new piece of evidence, Amy's expression grew more troubled and her questions more pointed. "He's been telling people you have cognitive decline?" she asked, her voice rising with indignation. "Mom, I've talked to you every week for months. You're as sharp as you've ever been. These claims are completely fabricated." Amy's validation meant more to me than I could express. As someone who had known me her entire life and maintained regular contact, she was uniquely positioned to evaluate whether Michael's claims about my mental state had any basis in reality. Her immediate rejection of those claims provided powerful evidence that Michael's campaign was based on lies rather than legitimate concerns. But Amy's most valuable contribution came from her understanding of corporate marketing and communication strategy. She recognized that Michael's approach followed classic patterns used in hostile takeovers and corporate restructuring, where existing leadership is discredited through carefully constructed narratives that make their removal seem inevitable and justified. "Michael isn't just trying to take over the company," Amy explained. "He's trying to make it impossible for you to challenge his actions by destroying your credibility in advance. If everyone believes you're mentally declining, they'll interpret any resistance you offer as evidence that proves his point." Over the weekend, Amy dove into the evidence with the same analytical rigor she applied to marketing campaigns at her technology company. She created timelines, identified patterns, and developed what she called a counter-narrative strategy designed to expose Michael's deception and restore my credibility. "We need to present this information in a way that makes the truth undeniable," Amy explained. "Michael has been telling a story about your decline and his reluctant assumption of leadership responsibility. We need to tell the real story about his calculated deception and systematic betrayal." Amy's plan involved 3 key elements. First, we needed to document the contrast between Michael's claims about my capabilities and the actual evidence of my continued competence. Second, we needed to expose the sophisticated nature of his manipulation campaign, showing that this wasn't a family concern, but a corporate power grab. Third, we needed to demonstrate the potential consequences of Michael's leadership, particularly his plans to sell the company to Titan Construction. "The beauty of this approach," Amy continued, "is that it doesn't require people to take your word against Michael's. The evidence speaks for itself. Anyone who reviews this information objectively will see that Michael has been systematically lying to achieve his goals." Sunday evening, as Amy prepared to extend her stay in Denver to help implement our strategy, she asked me a question that cut to the heart of everything that had happened. "Mom, do you think Michael actually believes some of the things he's been saying about you? Or is this pure calculated deception?" I had been wrestling with that same question since this nightmare began. Part of me wanted to believe that Michael had convinced himself his actions were justified, that he genuinely thought I was declining and needed to be protected from myself. It would be easier to forgive a son who was misguided than one who was simply ruthless. But the evidence painted a clear picture. The sophistication of Michael's campaign, the careful targeting of different messages to different audiences, the systematic nature of his information control. None of that suggested someone acting out of genuine concern for a declining parent. This was the work of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and was willing to destroy his own mother's reputation to achieve his goals. I think Michael has spent so much time justifying his actions to himself that he may have lost track of what's true and what's convenient, I finally answered. But the recordings Jim made show that Michael knows his claims about my mental state are false. He's not a confused son trying to help his mother. He's an ambitious executive eliminating a competitor who happens to be his family. Amy nodded sadly. Then we need to stop him before he destroys everything you've built. As we finalized our plans for the coming week, I felt grateful for Amy's unexpected support, but also heartbroken about the family dynamics that had made this situation possible. Michael's betrayal was devastating enough, but the realization that my own children were now on opposite sides of a battle for the company I had created added layers of pain that went beyond business or financial concerns. This wasn't just about Peterson Home Solutions anymore. This was about family, legacy, and the values I had tried to instill in my children. Michael's actions suggested that he had learned to see business as a zero-sum game where relationships were tools to be manipulated and trust was a weakness to be exploited. Amy's response showed that she still understood the importance of integrity and loyalty, even when family conflicts made taking sides painful and complicated. The real test would come in the days ahead, when we would have to present our case to people who had heard months of Michael's carefully constructed lies. We would be asking them to believe that someone they saw as a successful, educated business leader had systematically deceived them about his own mother's competence and intentions. The evidence was strong, but overcoming established narratives and cognitive bias would require careful planning and flawless execution. Monday morning arrived with deceptive calm, like the stillness before a tornado strikes. Amy had stayed the weekend to help me prepare for what we both knew would be the fight of my life. As I got dressed for work, selecting a navy blue suit that conveyed both professionalism and authority, I felt the weight of 25 years of relationship building resting on my shoulders. Everything I had worked for, every person who depended on Peterson Home Solutions, every client who trusted our integrity, it all came down to the next few days. Amy was in my kitchen when I came downstairs, already dressed in her own business, attire and typing rapidly on her laptop. She had spent Sunday evening creating what she called a presentation strategy that would systematically dismantle Michael's lies while demonstrating my continued competence and leadership capability. Her marketing expertise was proving invaluable in developing an approach that would be both compelling and difficult to dismiss. "I've been thinking about timing," Amy said as I poured my coffee. "Michael is expecting you to either accept his severance offer or fight back emotionally in a way that supports his narrative about your instability. What he's not expecting is a calm, professional presentation of evidence that exposes his deception." Tom joined us at the kitchen table, his emergency room physician training evident in his systematic approach to crisis management. Over the years, his medical background had taught him to remain calm under pressure, gather complete information before making diagnoses, and always consider alternative explanations for troubling symptoms. These skills were proving remarkably applicable to our current family emergency. "What's your timeline?" Tom asked, reviewing the documents Amy had organized overnight. "Today, I meet with Margaret Davidson at Davidson Hotel Group," I replied. "She's been our client for 12 years, and Michael has been telling her I'm planning to retire due to health concerns. If I can convince Margaret that Michael has been lying, she might be willing to help us expose his deception to other clients." Amy nodded approvingly. Margaret Davidson is perfect for this approach. As a successful businesswoman herself, she'll understand the dynamics of what's happening and appreciate the evidence-based presentation we've prepared. Plus, her relationship with you predates Michael's involvement, so she has her own basis for evaluating his claims. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than trying to fight Michael's narrative directly, we would demonstrate its falseness through my continued competence and the contradictions in his story. Margaret Davidson would see that I was clearly capable of complex business discussions, strategic thinking, and professional decision-making. The contrast between Michael's claims about my decline and the reality of my capabilities would speak louder than any defensive arguments I could make. As I prepared to leave for my meeting with Margaret, Amy surprised me with an additional element to our strategy. "Mom, I want to come with you to some of these meetings. Not as your supporter or advocate, but as an independent business professional who can evaluate the situation objectively." The suggestion was brilliant. Amy's presence would serve multiple purposes. Her marketing expertise would add credibility to our presentation. Her status as an outside observer would make her assessment seem more objective. And her willingness to publicly support me would counter any implications that my own family had lost confidence in my abilities. Margaret Davidson's office occupied the top floor of the renovated historic building that housed Davidson Hotel Group's headquarters. We had renovated the building's lobby and common areas 3 years earlier, and seeing our work as I entered, the building reminded me of the countless successful projects that had built our reputation. These weren't the accomplishments of someone suffering from cognitive decline or business incompetence. Margaret greeted me warmly, though I could detect underlying concern in her expression. She was clearly expecting to have a difficult conversation with someone she cared about but believed was no longer capable of managing her business effectively. The careful way she spoke and the gentle tone of her questions revealed that she had accepted Michael's narrative about my declining abilities. "Linda, I have to say I was surprised to hear from you," Margaret began as we settled into the comfortable chairs in her office conference area. "Michael mentioned that you were focusing on family time and stepping back from client interactions. Instead of immediately defending myself or expressing outrage at Michael's lies, I followed Amy's advice and responded with calm professionalism. Margaret, I asked for this meeting because there are some significant misunderstandings about my role at Peterson Home Solutions that need to be clarified. I'd like to share some information with you and get your thoughts on what it reveals." Over the next hour, I walked Margaret through the same evidence that had convinced Amy of Michael's deception. The timeline of organizational changes, the pattern of information control, the systematic exclusion from meetings and decisions, all presented without editorial comment, allowing Margaret to draw her own conclusions about what the patterns revealed. Margaret's business experience made her particularly sensitive to the signs of corporate manipulation. As the CEO of a successful hotel management company, she had dealt with her own share of internal politics, hostile takeover attempts, and employee power struggles. She recognized the sophisticated nature of Michael's campaign in ways that someone without executive experience might miss. "Linda, this doesn't look like a son concerned about his mother's well-being," Margaret said. "After reviewing our documentation, this looks like a calculated effort to gain control of your company through systematic discrediting." Amy spoke up for the first time during our meeting. "As someone who works in corporate marketing, I can tell you that Michael's approach follows textbook patterns for hostile takeovers. The gradual isolation, the narrative construction, the preemptive discrediting. These are sophisticated techniques designed to make the target's removal seem inevitable and justified." Margaret turned to Amy with increased interest. "You're Linda's daughter, but you work outside the family business. What's your objective assessment of your mother's capabilities?" Amy's response was perfect in its directness and credibility. "I talk to my mother every week and have for years. I've observed her manage complex business challenges, adapt to changing market conditions, and maintain relationships with demanding clients. The idea that she's suffering from cognitive decline or business incompetence is not just wrong. It's demonstrably false to anyone who actually interacts with her regularly." The meeting continued for another hour, with Margaret asking detailed questions about specific projects, client relationships, and business decisions that demonstrated my continued engagement and competence. By the end of our discussion, she was not only convinced that Michael had been lying, but was angry about being manipulated. "Linda, I need to ask you directly," Margaret said. "Are you planning to retire or step back from Peterson Home Solutions?" "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "I love this business. I'm good at what I do, and I have no intention of retiring until I choose to do so on my own terms. What Michael has described as my retirement plans are actually his plans to remove me from the company I built." Margaret's expression hardened. "Then we have a problem. Based on Michael's representations about your retirement, I've been exploring relationships with other contractors. I need to know that Peterson Home Solutions will continue to provide the level of service and personal attention that our partnership has always included." This was the opening I had been hoping for. "Margaret, Peterson Home Solutions will absolutely continue to provide that level of service, but only if we can prevent Michael from selling the company to Titan Construction." I explained Michael's secret negotiations with Titan, their business model of eliminating local contractors and standardizing operations, and the impact this would have on the personalized service that had made our partnership successful. Margaret's reaction was immediate and forceful. "Michael never mentioned anything about selling to a national chain," she said with obvious anger. "We specifically chose Peterson Home Solutions because of your local presence and personal involvement. If the company gets absorbed into a corporate structure, that defeats the entire purpose of our relationship." Amy pulled out additional research she had conducted on Titan Construction's other acquisitions. Based on their track record in other markets, Titan eliminates approximately 60% of existing staff within the first year after acquisition. They replace local contractors with their own crews and standardize all processes to maximize efficiency and profit margins. Margaret studied the information with the keen attention of someone evaluating a potential business threat. "This would be a disaster for our operations. We depend on continuity of relationships and institutional knowledge that takes years to develop. Starting over with a new corporate contractor would set us back significantly." By the end of our meeting, Margaret had not only committed to supporting my efforts to expose Michael's deception, but had offered to contact other major clients who had been fed similar stories about my retirement plans. Her validation carried enormous weight because of her own success as a business leader and her long history of working with Peterson Home Solutions. As Amy and I left Margaret's office, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since this nightmare had begun. We had successfully demonstrated that Michael's narrative was built on lies, and we had gained a powerful ally in our effort to expose his deception. But I also knew that Michael wouldn't simply accept defeat. His next moves would likely be even more aggressive and desperate. That afternoon, my instincts proved correct when Betty called with urgent news. "Linda, Michael has scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's telling board members that you've been making erratic decisions and that immediate action is needed to protect the company." The acceleration of Michael's timeline meant that our careful strategy of building support among clients and contractors might not have time to fully develop. We needed to move faster and take bigger risks if we were going to prevent Michael from consolidating control before the truth could emerge. "There's something else," Betty continued. "Michael has been meeting with individual board members over the past 2 days, and he's been telling them that you've been behaving strangely since the termination meeting. He's claiming that you've been making threats and acting irrationally." The sophistication of Michael's manipulation continued to astound me. By portraying my efforts to gather evidence and build support as erratic behavior, he was using my own resistance to his plans as proof that his concerns about my mental state were justified. Anyone who hadn't seen our evidence would interpret my actions through the lens of his false narrative. That evening, Amy and I worked until late in the night, preparing a presentation that would systematically dismantle Michael's lies while demonstrating the calculated nature of his deception. We organized the evidence chronologically, showing how each of Michael's actions had been designed to support his ultimate goal of gaining control of Peterson Home Solutions. Amy's marketing expertise was crucial in structuring our presentation for maximum impact. "We need to control the narrative from the very beginning," she explained. "Instead of responding to Michael's claims defensively, we present our evidence proactively, forcing him to respond to our allegations." The presentation would begin with the timeline of Michael's actions, showing the systematic nature of his campaign. We would then present the recordings Jim had made, proving that Michael knew his claims about my mental state were false. Finally, we would reveal Michael's secret negotiations with Titan Construction, demonstrating that his real motivation was financial gain rather than concern for the company's well-being. As we put the finishing touches on our presentation, Amy asked me a question that I had been dreading. "Mom, what happens to your relationship with Michael after tomorrow? Even if we succeed in exposing his deception, the family damage might be irreparable." I had been thinking about the same issue throughout our preparation. The evidence we were preparing to present wouldn't just challenge Michael's business decisions, it would expose him as someone willing to systematically lie about his own mother to achieve his goals. The revelation would destroy any remaining trust between us and likely end our relationship permanently. "Amy, I've been asking myself whether saving the company is worth losing my son," I admitted. "But then I think about all the people who depend on Peterson Home Solutions for their livelihoods, the clients who trust us with their projects, and the legacy I want to leave. I can't let Michael destroy all of that just to preserve a relationship that he's already betrayed." Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, with early snow dusting the mountains west of Denver. As I dressed for what I knew would be the most important presentation of my life, I thought about all the challenges I had overcome to build Peterson Home Solutions. Starting as a single mother with no business experience, surviving economic downturns, adapting to changing industry standards, building relationships that had sustained us through difficult times. None of it had prepared me for fighting my own son for control of the company I had created. Amy met me at the office early, carrying the evidence we had so carefully organized and the presentation materials that would tell our story. Betty was waiting for us in the lobby, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. Jim Rodriguez arrived shortly after, bringing additional recordings and documentation that would support our case. "Are you ready for this?" Amy asked as we rode the elevator to the conference room where the board meeting would take place. I thought about Margaret Davidson's support, about the clients who had been deceived by Michael's lies, about the employees who deserved to know the truth about what was happening to their company. Most importantly, I thought about the 25 years I had spent building something meaningful and the responsibility I had to protect it from someone who saw it only as an asset to be monetized. "I'm ready," I replied. "Let's go show them who Michael really is." Part 4. The Confrontation. The boardroom felt different that Tuesday morning, charged with tension that was almost palpable. As I entered with Amy, Betty, and Jim, I could see that Michael had carefully orchestrated the seating arrangement to maximize his advantage. He sat at the head of the table in what had traditionally been my chair, with Sarah positioned supportively to his right and the board members arranged to give him clear sightlines to everyone in the room. Michael's expression when he saw Amy was a mixture of surprise and calculation. He clearly hadn't expected her to be present, and I could see him rapidly recalibrating his strategy to account for this unexpected variable. Sarah looked distinctly uncomfortable, her usual professional composure replaced by visible anxiety about the confrontation she knew was coming. "I wasn't expecting such a large audience for what should be a straightforward discussion," Michael said smoothly, his tone carrying just the right note of concerned authority. "But since everyone is here, I suppose we can address all the issues at once." Board member Patricia Wells, who had been with Peterson Home Solutions for 8 years, spoke up first. "Michael called this emergency meeting because he's concerned about some erratic behavior following last week's transition discussion. He feels we need to address the situation before it impacts company operations or client relationships. The careful phrasing revealed that Michael had been just as manipulative with the board members as he had been with everyone else. My efforts to gather evidence and build support were being characterized as erratic behavior that threatened the company, while his systematic deception was presented as responsible leadership addressing a difficult family situation. Before we discuss anyone's behavior, I said calmly, I think the board should see some information that's directly relevant to the claims that have been made about my capabilities and intentions. I had Amy distribute copies of our evidence packet to each board member, while I set up the laptop and projector that would display our presentation. Michael watched this preparation with growing unease, clearly recognizing that we had come prepared for a much more comprehensive discussion than he had anticipated. I appreciate Mom's desire to participate in this process, Michael said with practiced patience. But I'm not sure a defensive presentation is the most productive use of everyone's time. We're here to discuss moving forward constructively. Amy spoke up before I could respond. Actually, we're here to discuss the truth about what's been happening at Peterson Home Solutions over the past 6 months. As someone who works in corporate communications, I can tell you that the patterns we've identified are extremely concerning from a business ethics perspective. The weight Amy's professional credentials carried with the board was immediately apparent. Several members leaned forward with increased attention, recognizing that her assessment came from outside the family dynamics and internal company politics that might bias other perspectives. I began our presentation with the timeline of organizational changes, showing how systematically Michael had isolated me from decision-making processes while positioning himself as the primary contact for clients and strategic planning. The visual representation of these changes made their calculated nature undeniable, even to board members who had been influenced by Michael's previous explanations. What we're looking at here isn't a natural leadership transition, I explained, using a laser pointer to highlight key dates and decisions. This is a systematic campaign to marginalize existing leadership, while creating the appearance that such marginalization is necessary and justified. Board member Robert Chang, our longtime financial advisor, studied the timeline carefully. Michael, some of these changes weren't discussed with the full board. The reorganization of client relationship management, for instance, that was presented as an efficiency improvement, not as a leadership transition. Michael's response revealed the first crack in his composed facade. Robert, we discussed the need for operational improvements extensively. Mom agreed to these changes because she recognized they were necessary for the company's growth. Actually, I never agreed to being excluded from client relationships I had spent years developing, I replied firmly. I was told these changes were temporary efficiency measures while you learned the accounts. I was never informed that the changes were permanent, or that you were telling clients I was planning to retire. The distinction was crucial, and I could see several board members taking notes as they recognized the significance of the misrepresentation. Michael had been presenting my cooperation with temporary arrangements as consent to permanent marginalization, using my trust against me to justify actions I had never actually approved. Amy advanced to the next section of our presentation, which focused on Michael's false claims about my mental state and business capabilities. What I'm about to play for you are recordings of conversations between Michael Peterson and Jim Rodriguez, a longtime business partner of Peterson Home Solutions. These recordings were made legally with single-party consent, and they reveal the calculated nature of the claims being made about Linda's competence. The first recording filled the room with Michael's voice describing fictional incidents of confusion, fabricated examples of poor judgment, and invented scenarios where I had needed his intervention to prevent mistakes. The clinical detail with which he constructed these lies, the concerned tone he used to deliver them, and the strategic way he wove them into broader concerns about my capacity to lead, it was masterfully manipulative and utterly false. Several board members looked visibly shocked as they listened to Michael systematically destroying my reputation, with lies that were so specific and detailed, they seemed credible to anyone who hadn't witnessed the actual events. Patricia Wells actually gasped when Michael described an incident where I had supposedly become confused during a client presentation, an event that had never occurred but was delivered with such convincing emotion that it seemed completely real. When the recording ended, the room was silent for several long moments. Michael's face had gone pale, and I could see him struggling to formulate a response that would minimize the damage of hearing his own voice delivering such calculated deceptions. Sarah was staring at her husband with an expression of horror and disbelief. "These recordings are taken out of context," Michael finally said, but his voice lacked the confident authority he had maintained throughout the earlier part of the meeting. "Jim Rodriguez has his own agenda in this situation, and editing conversations to create false impressions is surprisingly easy with modern technology." Jim Rodriguez spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Michael, I have the complete unedited recordings, timestamps showing when they were made, and witness statements from other contractors who heard similar claims. There's no editing, no manipulation, and no agenda other than preventing you from destroying Linda's reputation with lies." Amy advanced to our final section, revealing Michael's secret negotiations with Titan Construction and his plans to sell Peterson Home Solutions without board approval or stakeholder notification. The financial projections he had shared with Titan, the preliminary acquisition discussions, and the timeline for completing a sale, all of it documented with copies of actual communications and contracts. "This is why the systematic discrediting of Linda Peterson was necessary," Amy explained with the analytical precision of her marketing background. "Michael couldn't sell the company while she retained credibility and influence with clients, board members, and key stakeholders. The false narrative about her decline was designed to make her removal seem inevitable and her opposition to the sale seem irrational." Board member Susan Martinez, who had joined Peterson Home Solutions just 2 years earlier, raised her hand. "Are you telling us that this entire transition discussion was actually preparation for selling the company to a national chain?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I replied. "And under Titan Construction's business model, most of our current employees would be terminated, our local contractor relationships would be eliminated, and the personalized service approach that has made us successful would be replaced with standardized corporate procedures." The implications were staggering, and I could see board members processing not just the betrayal of trust, but the potential destruction of everything Peterson Home Solutions had built over 25 years. These weren't just business relationships and employment opportunities. They were the foundation of a community that had grown up around our company's success. Michael made one final attempt to control the narrative. "Even if some of my methods were questionable, the fundamental issue remains unchanged. This company needs modernization and professional management to survive in today's market." The acquisition discussions with Titan were preliminary explorations of options that could benefit everyone involved. Patricia Wells responded with obvious anger. "Michael, what we've just seen isn't questionable methods, it's systematic deception. You've lied to board members, clients, and business partners about your own mother's competence while secretly negotiating to sell the company she built. This isn't modernization. It's betrayal." Robert Chang was even more direct. "The financial projections you shared with us about improved profitability under your leadership, were those based on the Titan acquisition?" Michael's hesitation before answering told everyone in the room everything they needed to know. The projections included various scenarios for growth and optimization. "That's not an answer," Robert pressed. "Were your profit projections based on selling the company to Titan Construction? Yes or no?" "Some of the projections assumed strategic partnerships that could enhance our capabilities," Michael replied, still trying to avoid direct admission. Amy stepped in with devastating clarity. "The answer is yes. Michael's projections for improved profitability were based on the sale price Titan Construction was willing to pay, minus the costs of employee severances and contract terminations. He wasn't projecting operational improvements. He was calculating liquidation value. The revelation was the final nail in Michael's carefully constructed narrative. Every argument he had made about the need for new leadership, every projection he had shared about improved performance, every claim about modernization and growth, all of it had been designed to facilitate the sale of Peterson Home Solutions to a corporate buyer that would destroy everything we had built. Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Michael, is all of this true? Have you been lying about Linda's condition to justify taking over the company so you could sell it?" The pain in her voice was evident, and I realized that Sarah had been as deceived as everyone else. She had genuinely believed that her husband was trying to help his aging mother manage a difficult transition, not orchestrate a corporate takeover based on systematic deception. Michael's response was to attack rather than acknowledge. "Sarah, you of all people should understand the pressures I've been under trying to manage this situation diplomatically. Mom's resistance to change has made it impossible to have honest conversations about the company's future. But his defensive aggression only made his guilt more apparent. Throughout the meeting, Michael had maintained his composure by staying on the offensive, attacking my competence and positioning himself as the responsible leader making difficult decisions. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of his deception, he was revealing the angry, entitled person behind the careful facade. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. Michael Peterson was immediately terminated from all positions at Peterson Home Solutions, with his access to company systems and facilities revoked, pending a full investigation of his actions. Sarah was placed on administrative leave while the board determined her level of involvement in or knowledge of Michael's deception. But the victory felt hollow as I watched my son gather his belongings and leave the conference room. 25 years of building a family business, of trying to create something meaningful that could be passed down to the next generation, had ended with my own child being escorted from the building by security. The company was saved, but the family was shattered beyond repair. As the board members filed out, expressing their support and apologizing for being deceived by Michael's lies, Amy approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry this happened. I'm sorry Michael chose ambition over family, and I'm sorry you had to fight your own son to save what you built." I hugged my daughter tightly, grateful for her support, but heartbroken about the cost of this victory. Peterson Home Solutions would survive and continue to thrive, but the family that had created it would never be the same. Our Part 5, The Resolution and New Beginning. 3 weeks after the devastating board meeting that ended Michael's attempted coup, I sat in my restored corner office watching the morning sun paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and pink. The familiar routine of reviewing project reports and preparing for daily operations meetings felt both comforting and strange, like returning to a home that had been ransacked and rebuilt while you were away. Peterson Home Solutions was not just surviving Michael's betrayal. We were beginning to thrive in ways that surprised even me. The truth about his deception had spread quickly through our network of clients, contractors, and suppliers, generating a groundswell of support that went far beyond what I had expected. People were genuinely angry about the systematic lies Michael had told, and they were determined to demonstrate their confidence in my leadership and the company's integrity. Margaret Davidson had been true to her word, contacting other major clients to explain what had really happened and to confirm their continued partnership with Peterson Home Solutions. Robert Springfield from the Mall Development Company had actually increased his contract with us, saying he wanted to show his support for honest business practices in an industry where they're increasingly rare. Janet Walsh at Heritage Homes had introduced us to 3 new potential clients, specifically because she was impressed by how we had handled the crisis. The financial impact was remarkable. Instead of the projected losses Michael had warned about if I remained in control, Peterson Home Solutions was experiencing its strongest quarter in company history. Client loyalty, it turned out, was worth more than any efficiency improvements or modernization strategies Michael had proposed. People wanted to work with companies they could trust, and our willingness to expose and address internal problems had actually strengthened that trust rather than undermining it. Betty Morrison had been promoted to Vice President of Operations, a recognition of her loyalty during the crisis and her deep understanding of how the company actually functioned. Her first initiative was implementing new transparency protocols to ensure that no one person could control information flow or manipulate internal communications the way Michael had. We were building systems that would prevent future deception, while maintaining the collaborative culture that had always been our strength. Jim Rodriguez had become more than a contractor partner. He was now serving as an informal advisor on maintaining integrity in business relationships. His willingness to record and document Michael's lies had been crucial to exposing the truth, and his network of contacts throughout the Denver construction industry was helping us identify other companies that shared our values-based approach to business. Amy had decided to take a leave of absence from her Phoenix job to help Peterson Home Solutions implement new marketing and communication strategies. Her professional expertise was proving invaluable in rebuilding our reputation and telling our story in ways that demonstrated our commitment to honest, relationship-based business practices. Having her involved also provided some healing for the family wounds that Michael's actions had created. The most surprising development was Sarah's decision to remain with the company after the investigation concluded that she had been unaware of Michael's deception. Sarah had been devastated to learn the extent of her husband's lies, and their marriage was now in serious jeopardy. But her marketing skills were genuine, and her commitment to ethical business practices had been real, even when she was unknowingly implementing strategies based on false information. I feel like I need to make amends for being part of something that hurt you, even though I didn't know what was really happening, Sarah had told me during a difficult conversation about her future with the company. If you're willing to give me the chance, I want to help rebuild what Michael tried to destroy. The investigation into Michael's actions had revealed even more extensive deception than we had initially discovered. He had been systematically overcharging clients on certain projects and pocketing the difference, using his control of financial information to hide the theft. He had been accepting kickbacks from suppliers in exchange for steering business to them rather than our established partners who offered better quality and service. Most shocking, he had been spreading false information about competitors to potential clients, using lies and rumors to make Peterson Home Solutions seem like a better choice by comparison. The legal consequences were severe. Michael was facing charges for embezzlement, fraud, and defamation, with potential civil penalties that could cost him everything he had gained from his deception. The criminal case was proceeding slowly through the court system, but the evidence was overwhelming, and his conviction seemed inevitable. But for me, the legal justice was less important than the personal reckoning. Michael had chosen to see me as an obstacle to his ambitions rather than the mother who had spent decades preparing him to inherit a successful business. He had been willing to destroy my reputation, betray my trust, and sacrifice relationships that had taken years to build, all for the sake of a quick profit from selling the company to Titan Construction. The most painful realization was that Michael's betrayal hadn't been impulsive or driven by desperation. The sophistication of his campaign, the careful timing of his actions, and the detailed planning he had invested in discrediting me, all of it showed that he had been preparing to remove me from my own company for months, possibly years. This wasn't a son making a regrettable mistake. This was someone who had systematically planned the destruction of his own mother's life work. Tom had been my anchor throughout the entire crisis, providing emotional support and practical advice, while maintaining his own demanding schedule as an emergency room physician. His medical training had helped him recognize the psychological manipulation tactics Michael had used, and his outsider's perspective had provided crucial objectivity when I was too emotionally involved to see clearly. Michael always had trouble with delayed gratification, Tom observed during one of our evening conversations about how this could have happened. Even as a teenager, he wanted results immediately rather than building them over time. I think he saw your success and wanted to claim it for himself rather than earning his own. The observation was insightful and heartbreaking. I had tried to teach both my children the value of patient relationship building, ethical business practices, and earning trust through consistent performance. Amy had internalized these lessons and applied them successfully in her own career. Michael had learned the concepts intellectually, but had never truly embraced them emotionally, seeing them as obstacles to faster advancement rather than foundations for sustainable success. 6 months after the crisis began, Peterson Home Solutions was stronger than it had ever been. We had expanded our staff to handle increased demand, opened a second office to serve clients in Colorado Springs, and established new partnerships with contractors who shared our commitment to quality and integrity. The company Michael had tried to destroy was thriving specifically because we had rejected his approach and doubled down on the values that had built our success. But the personal cost remained enormous. Michael had made no attempt to apologize or reconcile, instead hiring lawyers to fight the criminal charges and civil lawsuits that were the consequences of his actions. He had moved to California, where he was reportedly working for a corporate consulting firm that specialized in helping companies optimize their operational efficiency, a euphemism for the kind of relationship-destroying cost-cutting that he had tried to implement at Peterson Home Solutions. Amy had decided to make her move to Denver permanent, accepting the position of marketing director while maintaining her relationships in the technology industry. Her decision provided some consolation for the loss of Michael, demonstrating that at least one of my children understood the value of what we had built together and wanted to be part of preserving it. Sarah's divorce from Michael was proceeding through the courts, with custody arrangements for their 2 children creating additional complications. Sarah had chosen to keep the Peterson name professionally, saying it represented the values she wanted to maintain in her career even though her marriage to Michael was ending. Her continued presence at the company served as a daily reminder of the family relationships that had been damaged by Michael's choices, but also of the possibility for healing and rebuilding trust. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly 1 year after Michael's attempted coup, I stood in the conference room where the final confrontation had taken place. The room had been redecorated with photographs of our most successful projects, thank you letters from satisfied clients, and awards recognizing our contributions to the Denver business community. The mahogany table remained the same, but the atmosphere was completely different, open, collaborative, and focused on building rather than destroying. The weekly leadership meeting that morning included Betty, Amy, Sarah, Jim Rodriguez as our contractor relations advisor, and 3 new department heads we had hired to support our expansion. The agenda focused on upcoming projects, client relationship management, and strategic planning for the following year. It was exactly the kind of collaborative, relationship-focused discussion that Michael had dismissed as inefficient and outdated. As the meeting concluded and everyone prepared to return to their daily responsibilities, Amy lingered behind to speak with me privately. "Mom, I've been thinking about what happened with Michael and what lessons we should take from it." I settled back into my chair, always interested in Amy's analytical perspectives on family and business dynamics. "What conclusions have you reached?" "I think Michael's biggest mistake was believing that business success comes from manipulating people rather than serving them," Amy said thoughtfully. "He focused so much on trying to control perceptions and outcomes that he lost sight of the fundamental purpose of what we do, solving problems for clients while building relationships that create value for everyone involved." Her observation captured something essential about the difference between Michael's approach and the values that had built Peterson Home Solutions. Business wasn't a zero-sum game where someone had to lose for someone else to win. The most sustainable success came from creating value for clients, employees, contractors, and communities in ways that benefited everyone involved. "The irony," I replied, "is that if Michael had been patient and focused on learning rather than taking over, he could have inherited a company that was even more successful than what he tried to steal." His impatience and dishonesty cost him everything he claimed to want. As Amy left to return to her marketing responsibilities, I remained in the conference room thinking about legacy and the unpredictable ways that family businesses evolve across generations. I had built Peterson Home Solutions with the hope that it would provide opportunities for my children and security for my family. Michael's betrayal had shattered that dream, but Amy's commitment to the company's values had created new possibilities for the future. The company would survive and prosper, serving clients with integrity and providing meaningful work for employees who shared our commitment to excellence. The family dynamics were forever changed, but the values that had built our success, honesty, relationship building, patient development of trust and competence, would continue to guide our decisions and define our identity. Michael had said I was too old to understand modern business, but he had fundamentally misunderstood what business was really about. Success wasn't about age or technology or manipulation. It was about serving people well, keeping your commitments, and building relationships that create value over time. These principles were timeless, and they had served Peterson Home Solutions well for 25 years. They would continue to serve us well for the next 25 years and beyond. The morning sun was fully up now, casting warm light across the conference table where I had fought for my company's survival and won. Peterson Home Solutions was more than a business. It was a testament to the power of persistence, integrity, and the courage to fight for what you believe in, even when the opponent is someone you love. The victory had come at an enormous personal cost, but it had also proven that experience, wisdom, and genuine relationships will always triumph over manipulation, deception, and shortcuts to success. My son had underestimated me, but in doing so, he had given me the opportunity to demonstrate that at 58 years old, I was just getting started. The weeks following Michael's termination passed in a blur of legal consultations, client meetings, and the delicate work of rebuilding trust throughout our business network. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly word would spread about what had really happened at Peterson Home Solutions. The construction and renovation industry in Denver was surprisingly small, and news of Michael's systematic deception traveled through contractor networks, supplier relationships, and client circles faster than I could have imagined. The response was overwhelming and entirely unexpected. Instead of the damage to our reputation that Michael had predicted would result from my outdated leadership style, we were experiencing an unprecedented wave of support from the business community. Contractors who had worked with us for years were referring new clients specifically because they respected how we had handled the crisis. Suppliers were offering better terms and priority service because they admired our commitment to honest business practices. Most surprising of all, potential clients were seeking us out because they wanted to work with a company that had proven its integrity under pressure. Margaret Davidson had become more than just a loyal client. She had transformed into an active advocate for Peterson Home Solutions throughout the hospitality industry. Her position as CEO of Davidson Hotel Group carried significant influence, and she was using that influence to spread the word about our company's ethical standards and professional competence. Within 3 weeks of Michael's removal, we had received inquiries from 4 new hotel properties seeking renovation services, all of them referred by Margaret's enthusiastic recommendations. What happened at Peterson Home Solutions is exactly what our industry needs more of, Margaret told me during one of our regular check-in calls. Too many companies are focused on quick profits and cutting corners. You've shown that there's still value in doing business with integrity, even when it's difficult and expensive. Robert Springfield from the Mall Development Company had a similar perspective, but his response was even more concrete. He had accelerated the timeline for 3 upcoming projects, specifically to demonstrate his confidence in our company's stability and leadership. Linda, I've been in this business for 25 years, and I've learned that the most dangerous contractors are the ones who promise everything and deliver disappointment. What you've shown is that experience and honesty are more valuable than flashy presentations and aggressive pricing. The financial impact was remarkable. Instead of the projected revenue decline that Michael had warned would result from my continued leadership, Peterson Home Solutions was experiencing its strongest quarter in company history. The contracts we were winning weren't just larger, they were more profitable because clients were willing to pay premium prices for the reliability and quality they associated with our brand. Betty Morrison was thriving in her new role as Vice President of Operations, bringing a level of systematic organization to our processes that complemented my relationship-focused leadership style. Her first major initiative was implementing what she called transparency protocols, designed to ensure that no individual could control information flow or manipulate internal communications the way Michael had done. We're building systems that preserve our collaborative culture while preventing future deception, Betty explained during one of our weekly strategy meetings. The goal is to maintain the open, trust-based environment that makes Peterson Home Solutions special while protecting against the kind of systematic manipulation that Michael used against you. The new protocols included regular all-staff meetings where financial performance, client feedback, and strategic decisions were shared openly with everyone in the company. We implemented rotating leadership for major projects, ensuring that no single person could dominate client relationships or project outcomes. Most importantly, we established direct communication channels between senior leadership and every level of the organization, making it impossible for anyone to isolate decision-makers from operational realities. Amy's decision to relocate permanently to Denver had provided an unexpected bonus for both the company and our family. Her marketing expertise was proving invaluable in rebuilding our reputation and telling our story in ways that resonated with potential clients. But more than her professional skills, Amy's presence was helping to heal some of the family wounds that Michael's betrayal had created. "Mom, I've been thinking about what this experience has taught me about family businesses," Amy said during one of our Sunday dinners at home. "I used to think the biggest risk was that personal relationships would interfere with business decisions. But what happened with Michael showed me that the opposite is also true. Business ambitions can destroy family relationships if people lose sight of their values." Tom nodded thoughtfully from across the dinner table. Michael forgot that the business was supposed to serve the family, not the other way around. He became so focused on growing the company that he was willing to sacrifice everything that made it worth having. The observation was profound and painful. I had built Peterson Home Solutions to create security and opportunities for my children, but Michael had been willing to destroy family relationships to claim a larger share of that security for himself. The success I had worked so hard to create had become a source of division rather than unity, at least where Michael was concerned. Sarah's situation remained complicated and heartbreaking. Her divorce from Michael was proceeding through the courts, with custody arrangements for their 2 children creating additional stress and uncertainty. Sarah had chosen to retain the Peterson name professionally, saying it represented the values she wanted to maintain in her career, even though her marriage to Michael was ending. "I feel like I need to prove that I understand what Peterson Home Solutions really stands for," Sarah had told me during one of our difficult conversations about her future with the company. "I was part of Michael's plans, even though I didn't know how deceptive they were. I want to help rebuild what he tried to destroy, if you'll let me." Sarah's commitment to making amends was genuine, and her marketing skills were valuable to our recovery efforts. But her continued presence at the company served as a daily reminder of the family relationships that had been damaged by Michael's choices. Every time I saw her in the office, I was reminded of the grandchildren whose family had been shattered by their father's betrayal, and the daughter-in-law who had been caught between loyalty to her husband and doing what was right. The investigation into Michael's activities had revealed even more extensive deception than we had initially discovered. A forensic accounting review showed that he had been systematically overcharging clients on materials and labor costs, then pocketing the difference through a complex scheme involving fake invoices and shell companies. The amounts weren't huge by corporate standards, but they represented a pattern of dishonesty that went back more than 2 years. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Michael had been accepting kickbacks from certain suppliers in exchange for steering business to them rather than our established partners who offered better quality and service. He had been compromising our work quality and client satisfaction to enrich himself, all while presenting himself as a responsible leader focused on company growth and operational efficiency. Most shocking of all was evidence that Michael had been spreading false information about competitors to potential clients, using lies and rumors to make Peterson Home Solutions seem like a better choice by comparison. He had been telling clients that established contractors were having financial difficulties, that certain companies were using substandard materials, or that competitor owners were planning to retire and leave their businesses in uncertain hands. "This isn't just about what Michael did to you," our attorney explained during one of our meetings about the criminal case against him. "This is about systematic fraud that affected clients, competitors, and the entire industry. The prosecutor is treating this as a serious case of business fraud, not just a family dispute." The criminal charges against Michael were extensive: embezzlement, fraud, defamation, and conspiracy to commit business fraud. The civil penalties could be even more severe, with potential damages that would cost him everything he had gained from his deception. But for me, the legal consequences were less important than the moral reckoning that Michael would have to face. As autumn turned to winter, Peterson Home Solutions continued to grow stronger. We had hired 6 new employees to handle increased demand, opened a satellite office in Colorado Springs to serve clients in the southern part of the state, and established new partnerships with contractors who shared our commitment to quality and integrity. The company Michael had tried to destroy was thriving specifically because we had rejected his approach and recommitted to the values that had built our original success. The most gratifying development was the response from our longtime employees. Workers who had been with Peterson Home Solutions for years were openly expressing relief that Michael was gone and enthusiasm about the company's future direction. They had been uncomfortable with his management style and suspicious of his claims about my declining capabilities, but they hadn't felt safe expressing those concerns while he was in power. Michael always made us feel like we were expendable. One of our longtime project managers told me during a company meeting. He would talk about efficiency improvements and cost reductions in ways that made it sound like our jobs were always at risk. "Working with you feels like being part of a team again, not just being supervised by someone who sees us as expenses to be minimized." The comment crystallized something important about the difference between Michael's approach and the culture that had made Peterson Home Solutions successful. Michael had seen employees as costs to be controlled rather than assets to be developed. He had focused on extracting maximum productivity from people, rather than creating conditions where they could do their best work and feel valued for their contributions. Jim Rodriguez had become more than a contractor partner. He was now serving as an informal advisor on maintaining integrity in business relationships. His willingness to document Michael's lies had been crucial to exposing the truth, and his network of contacts throughout the Denver construction industry was helping us identify other companies that shared our values-based approach to business. "What you did took courage," Jim told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. "Most people would have accepted the severance package and walked away rather than fighting their own son for control of their company. You showed that integrity matters more than family loyalty when family members are acting dishonestly." The observation was both validating and painful. I had struggled with the decision to expose Michael's deception, knowing that it would destroy our relationship and potentially damage his future prospects. But allowing him to continue his lies would have meant sacrificing the livelihoods of dozens of employees, the trust of clients who depended on our honesty, and the reputation that had taken 25 years to build. Spring brought news that Michael had accepted a plea agreement that would spare him jail time in exchange for making full restitution to Peterson Home Solutions and the clients he had defrauded. The financial settlement was substantial, but more important was the formal acknowledgement of his wrongdoing and the requirement that he make public apologies to the people he had harmed. Michael's lawyer says he wants to include a personal letter to you as part of the restitution process. Our attorney informed me during a meeting about the final settlement terms. He's asking if you would be willing to meet with him to discuss rebuilding your relationship. The request created a mixture of emotions that I struggled to sort through. Part of me desperately wanted to rebuild the relationship with my son, to find a way to forgive his betrayal and restore some semblance of family unity. But another part of me recognized that Michael's request might be motivated more by legal strategy than genuine remorse, and that meeting with him could reopen wounds that were finally beginning to heal. After discussing the situation with Tom and Amy, I decided to decline Michael's request for a personal meeting while accepting his written apology as part of the legal settlement. The letter, when it arrived, was professionally written and appropriately contrite, but it lacked the genuine emotion and personal accountability that would have indicated real understanding of the harm he had caused. I made serious errors in judgment that hurt you personally and damaged the company we both care about, Michael's letter read. I allowed ambition to override family loyalty and business ethics. I hope that someday you can forgive me for the pain I've caused. The apology was adequate for legal purposes, but it felt hollow on a personal level. Michael was acknowledging his mistakes without taking full responsibility for the calculated nature of his deception. He was expressing regret without demonstrating understanding of why his actions had been so devastating to everyone involved. Summer brought the one-year anniversary of Michael's attempted coup, and I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in that time. Peterson Home Solutions was not only surviving, but thriving, with revenue growth of 30% over the previous year and a backlog of projects that extended into the following spring. We had become known throughout the Denver area as a company that prioritized integrity and relationship building over short-term profits and competitive manipulation. Amy had fully embraced her role as marketing director, developing campaigns that highlighted our commitment to honest business practices and long-term client relationships. Her professional background in technology marketing had brought fresh perspectives to our traditional industry, but she had been careful to maintain the personal touch and collaborative approach that had always distinguished Peterson Home Solutions from larger, more impersonal contractors. The key to our marketing message, Amy explained during a presentation to the entire staff, is authenticity. We're not trying to be something we're not, or promise things we can't deliver. We're simply telling the truth about who we are and what we stand for, and letting clients decide if that's what they're looking for. The approach was working remarkably well. Clients were responding positively to our straightforward communication style, our transparency about project timelines and costs, and our willingness to address problems directly rather than hiding them behind corporate jargon and bureaucratic procedures. We were winning contracts not because we were the cheapest option, but because clients trusted us to deliver what we promised. Sarah had grown into her role as Director of Client Relations, developing systems for maintaining long-term relationships with our established customers while identifying opportunities for new business development. Her work was helping us build the kind of systematic approach to relationship management that had previously been handled through my personal connections and informal networking. What I've learned from working with you, Sarah told me during one of our quarterly reviews, is that business relationships are really personal relationships that happen to involve commercial transactions. The companies that succeed long-term are the ones that understand people, not just markets or profit margins. As the second anniversary of Michael's betrayal approached, I received an unexpected phone call from Margaret Davidson with news that would complete our victory in ways I had never anticipated. Davidson Hotel Group was being acquired by a national hospitality company, and Margaret was recommending Peterson Home Solutions as the preferred contractor for renovating their entire portfolio of properties across the western United States. Linda, this contract would be worth more than $50 million over the next 5 years, Margaret explained during our meeting to discuss the opportunity. The acquiring company has been impressed by our renovation quality and our satisfaction with your work. They want to establish a partnership with a contractor they can trust to maintain consistency and quality across multiple properties. The contract would represent the largest single opportunity in Peterson Home Solutions history, requiring us to expand our operation significantly while maintaining the quality standards and personal attention that had built our reputation. It would also provide the financial security and growth potential that Michael had claimed could only be achieved through corporate acquisition and cost-cutting strategies. Margaret, this is an incredible opportunity, but I want to make sure we can deliver the level of service you expect, I replied. We've always prioritized quality over quantity, and I don't want to compromise that by taking on more work than we can handle properly. Margaret smiled. That's exactly why we want to work with you. Any contractor can promise to handle large-scale projects, but most of them sacrifice quality for efficiency once they get the contract. We know that Peterson Home Solutions will maintain the same standards whether we're renovating one hotel or 50 hotels. The partnership with Davidson Hotel Group would require hiring additional staff, establishing regional offices, and developing new systems for managing multi-state operations. But it would also allow us to bring our values-based approach to business to a much larger market, demonstrating that integrity and relationship building could succeed at any scale of operation. As I sat in my office that evening, reviewing the preliminary terms of the partnership agreement, I thought about how far Peterson Home Solutions had come since that devastating day when Michael had tried to remove me from the company I had built. His betrayal had been intended to destroy my credibility and eliminate my influence, but it had actually forced me to prove my worth in ways that had made the company stronger than ever. Michael had said I was too old to understand modern business, but he had fundamentally misunderstood what business was really about. Success wasn't about age or technology or manipulation. It was about serving people well, keeping your commitments, and building relationships that create value over time. These principles were timeless, and they had served Peterson Home Solutions well for 25 years. They would continue to serve us well as we expanded into new markets and took on new challenges. The final irony was that Michael's attempted coup had actually accelerated the growth and success he had claimed was impossible under my leadership. By forcing me to prove my capabilities publicly and systematically, he had created the conditions for Peterson Home Solutions to demonstrate its value to a much wider audience than we had ever reached before. The morning sun was streaming through my office windows as I prepared for another day of meetings with contractors, clients, and employees who had become more than business associates. They had become partners in building something meaningful and lasting. Peterson Home Solutions was more than a company. It was a testament to the power of persistence, integrity, and the courage to fight for what you believe in, even when the opponent is someone you love. My son had underestimated me, but in doing so, he had given me the opportunity to demonstrate that at 59 years old, I wasn't just getting started. I was reaching the peak of my capabilities and influence. The company he had tried to steal was now poised to become everything he had claimed it could never be under my leadership, and the success we were achieving was built on the foundation of values he had rejected as outdated and irrelevant. The victory was complete, but it had come at an enormous personal cost. Michael remained estranged from the family, living in California and working for a corporate consulting firm that specialized in the kind of relationship-destroying efficiency improvements he had tried to implement at Peterson Home Solutions. Our grandchildren visited occasionally, but the easy family gatherings that had once been a source of joy were now awkward and painful reminders of the trust that had been broken. But Amy's presence in Denver had provided some healing for the family wounds that Michael's actions had created. Her commitment to the company's values and her success in building new opportunities for growth had shown that at least one of my children understood the true value of what we had built together. She was carrying forward the legacy I had hoped to pass on to both my children, demonstrating that integrity and hard work could achieve more than ambition and manipulation ever could. As I looked out at the Denver skyline, Seeing the buildings where we had completed projects and the neighborhoods where we had restored homes, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. Peterson Home Solutions had survived its greatest challenge and emerged stronger than ever. The values that had built our success, honesty, relationship building, commitment to quality, and respect for the people we served, had proven their worth in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Michael had taught me an important lesson about family businesses and personal relationships. Success could be a source of unity and shared purpose, but it could also become a source of division and betrayal if people lost sight of why they were building something together in the first place. The business was supposed to serve the family and the community, not the other way around. When ambition became more important than relationships, when profit became more important than integrity, the foundation of everything worthwhile was at risk. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that Michael had never imagined when he tried to force me into retirement. Peterson Home Solutions was positioned to become a regional leader in commercial renovation, with opportunities for growth that would provide security and meaningful work for hundreds of employees. The relationships we had built over 25 years were now yielding benefits that no amount of corporate efficiency or technological innovation could have achieved. At 59 years old, I had learned that experience wasn't a liability to be overcome but an asset to be leveraged. The relationships I had spent decades building, the trust I had earned through consistent performance, and the wisdom I had gained from navigating countless challenges, these were the real sources of competitive advantage in any business. Michael had dismissed these assets as outdated, but they had proven to be the foundation of everything we had accomplished and everything we would achieve in the future. The story of Peterson Home Solutions was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning a new chapter that would be built on the values Michael had rejected and the relationships he had tried to destroy. The company he had attempted to steal would continue to grow and prosper, serving clients with integrity and providing opportunities for employees who shared our commitment to excellence. The family business would survive and thrive, even though the family had been forever changed by his betrayal. My son had said I was too old to understand business, but he had never understood that business was really about understanding people. And people, it turned out, still valued honesty, reliability, and genuine care for their needs and concerns. These timeless principles had built Peterson Home Solutions, and they would carry us forward into whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.